Hello, everybody. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us and for being part of this process. My name is Michael Anthony, and I will be the guy asking questions today. I am the lead organizer of a group called the Bathurst Manor Action Group that does a whole lot of stuff between Bathurst and Dufferin and Shepherd and Finch. And always looking to get people involved and engaged in the democratic process, especially around election time. And with the by-election going on, we would usually have something in person, but we are doing the best that we can with the technology that we have. I want to thank Daniel Warner very much for setting this up, and I want to thank the Liberal candidate Yaara Sachs for joining us and making herself available to answer some questions and to engage with the community as we work towards our decisions. So thank you, Yaara, and welcome.
Thank you.
The way that this is going to roll is that Yaara is going to have a minute or two to say a few words of introduction, and then we'll get into 7 questions that I have prepared. A lot of it is taken, most of it, all of it is taken from different conversations that I've had with community members, as well as requests and calls out for questions that I have added to this list. So it is, I think, pretty exhaustive and encompasses a lot of what we are concerned about and wanting to know. I will also say right now that all of the candidates are being given the opportunity to have a conversation like this. That will be the exact same format with the exact same questions, and I'll say more about that towards the end. But just in case anybody wanted to know, that's the deal. So, Yaara, I open the floor to you and to say a few words about yourself and about the campaign.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for having me on the Bathurst Manor Action Group. I actually live on the other side of the manor on Canyon, so I'm not very sure if it's considered part of the manor or not, but my mom actually lives in the manor. I was born in Toronto, grew up in Toronto and Israel. My mom is Canadian, my dad is Israeli. Went through the school system here of Associated Chat, Young Judea, Camp Shalom, all of that stuff, in addition to living in Even Yehuda in Israel on and off as a child, and then went on to live in Israel to do a master's degree at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And worked in Israeli politics for over a decade, including at the mayor's office in the city of Jerusalem and other various ministries. What else do I want to say? I'm a single mom. My claim to fame is I own the local yoga studio at Bathurst and Shepherd with my business partner, Blake, who's also from the manor. During my day job, when I am not running for office, I am the director of a mental health charity here at Young and Shepherd called Trauma Practice for Healthy Communities. We are a charitable organization that provides free group support programming with a psychology team specializing in trauma. We work with Humber Hospital and North York General. All of our work is free. We work with Veterans Affairs, Victim Services, and many other important social service-based programs in the city for individuals whose either their funding has run out, whether it's WSIB or other programs, to make sure that they continue to get support in mental health. COVID has been a really challenging time for us at the charity. Our work has more than doubled, and it's really important work for the community that I love to be engaged with. And I'm also one of the clinical teams there because I'm trained as a yoga therapist working with veterans. I was trained out of the United States to work with health teams on health protocols and teams of psychiatrists and physicians to help mostly veterans in that context, but individuals struggling with PTSD who are going through recovery. And what else would I want to share at this point? Let's leave it to the questions because I know there are a lot of them, and I will do my best to answer all of them in time. I know some of them are more burning than others. We'll
All
leave it
right,
there.
that is no problem at all. So, question number one is why are you running to represent this riding, and what is your connection to this riding? I know you've already said a little bit about it, but why are you running to represent this riding?
So first and foremost, it's not my first foray into politics. This is the first time I'm a candidate, but it's certainly not the first time that I have been in the process of being in politics. And for me, it's always been the anchor of my involvement in political life has been anchored in community. The piece of community engagement and helping communities build supports and resources that they need is vital to the work that I do, and it has always been vital to the work that I do, whether it's been in Israel or here. That's my jam. That's what I really like to do, is working with constituents, working with community organizations to figure out how we can get them to grow and thrive, how they can make their lives better and the community around them, myself included. It's what I love about being in New York Center is, and running here is, constituents are my neighbors. I'm in this community. I live here. My children are educated here. My family lives here. I've grown up here. And I feel that I have that voice to be in Ottawa as a strong voice for York Centre because it's my home too. And this is the first time they've had a local resident running for the riding, in addition to a woman running for the riding. And I felt that this was my time to put all of my experience over the years in community work forward, where it's needed most in Ottawa, especially dealing with the pandemic. As a single mother, as a business owner, and someone who works in mental health, I've seen it from every angle and how it's impacted my life, my employees, my staff's life, both at the yoga studio and at the mental health charity, the people who I work with. And I really want to put that experience and my lens forward for the community in Ottawa. And it was the time to do it.
Okay. Taking that idea of ideas around COVID, what are some of your ideas or some of the initiatives that you would bring forward or champion as we deal with COVID-19 as a nation?
Good question. I'm going to break it up to a few different pieces, if I may. First and foremost, the lens of what we've all experienced in COVID has been that the Band-Aid got ripped off on what were the weaknesses in the social welfare network that we have in Canada, which is it's a great structure. We have an EI system here. We have a healthcare system here. We have all different mechanisms that have worked for many, many, many years, for decades, to bring families forward, to bring the middle class forward, to what we thought were the ideal tools for success for families to grow, for businesses to thrive in Canada. And what we've discovered is that what we have, the network that we have, doesn't work for the reality of life today for most families. We, myself included, have staff who work in a gig economy. The gig economy doesn't answer to EI. The gig economy doesn't answer with sick benefits. The healthcare system doesn't answer mental health needs. And I know for myself as a single mom, there's many things that I benefited from during COVID, including the CERB, including top-ups and CCB. All of those things were great, but that doesn't help my self-employed, my self-contracted staff as we go forward if we had kept the EI structure as it was. And what I think is important at this moment is, now that we see what doesn't work, and we've kind of known what hasn't worked for a really long time, we have a chance to really rebuild it right. And we already see indications of that. The new EI system is rolling out to transfer out of CERB, so that people looking for work who may have not fit into the EI structure before have a safety net as they go out into what is still, we're still in a pandemic. Like, precarious work is still precarious work. And the government knows that and is testing out models of how we move forward. While it's not currently in the throne speech at this time, discussions are happening around the universal basic income concept and what it may mean in the future. And we need to, sorry, the comments are a bit distracting at the bottom. And we need to look at those mechanisms of how we move forward in supporting families and also supporting businesses. So my job as an MP is to really look at the lens of my constituents and bring that forward to Ottawa. I can talk about my experience as a small business owner. There were things that were great about the CEBA, the Emergency Business Account. There were things that weren't great about the SURSA with the landlords. That's already being restructured, rolling out in October and into November. That rent support is not going to the landlords, it's going to businesses. So this is a learning process. And my experience here in the community and what constituents bring towards me in the community are going to help in shaping how we move forward. There's a lot of things we need to work on, there's no question. You know, there are aspects of long-term care homes and other pieces to the puzzle that we still need to figure out. But first and foremost, the Band-Aid's been ripped off and the federal government is saying we need to fix these things. And it's not like we're going to fix them in 10 years from now, we need to fix them now. And I think that's really the shift that's happened during COVID. And to me, why it was so important to not be another constituent just watching it here, but to drive that voice forward in Ottawa to represent the community now.
Okay, thank you. Question number 3 is, we are a community which is politically engaged all year round, not just during election time. How will you structure your engagement with us as individuals and as a collective?
Okay, I love that question. That's a really good question. So for those of you, and I think there might be some of you who are on this panel tonight might know, Michael knows as well, I love the idea of one-on-one time. I have my door open or my Zoom room open or my messenger or phone open to hear from. Even during this time period, people have come forward and asked to speak to me one-on-one on many different issues. Some of them we'll get to soon. And my door is always open for those discussions that need to happen and also to get feedback. But that's rooted all the way back to my time when I worked in City Hall in Jerusalem. My key role was to work with every community across the city to do needs determination. So working with the ultra-Orthodox community, working with the Arab community, working with the East Jerusalem resident community, which was a Palestinian community as well as the secular and what we call national religious communities. So Jerusalem's very, very diverse. And what I loved is that I could go into each and every community and spend time doing annually needs assessment, whether it was in welfare, whether it was in education, whether it was in infrastructure, and go back with that to the city because the mayor's office had funds to pull from to top up and address needs as they shifted and changed. It's what I love to do. So on this role and coming into being an MP, the same system and organizational structure that I would use there is how I would model my work here. We have a priorities MPs not to just sit in Ottawa. We have a priorities MPs to work one-on-one with our communities in the riding and carry that to Ottawa when needed, when it fits, or make sure that individuals or communities here are being redirected to the supports and resources that are already on the ground to them so we can enhance the work that they're doing. So I see it as an ongoing dialogue. It's not something that happens from one election to the next. It's something that should happen all the time. Some of the communities that I worked with in Jerusalem and in Israel, we used to have monthly meetings to see how progress was going on projects that they were working on or were engaged with the mayor's office. And those relationships should be built here and nurtured as well. I don't see any, that's my job as the riding's representative, and I take it very seriously.
Terrific. This is one about our local small businesses. We care greatly about the success of our local small businesses. What ideas will you bring forward or champion to support our local small businesses now and in the future?
Also a great question. So as a small business owner myself, during this pandemic, it's been really hard. We had to completely pivot. We couldn't make do with doing takeout or pivoting, but still keeping our storefront running. We were publicly mandated to close, or public health mandated us to close as a yoga studio. So it meant that we were suddenly confronted with space that we were paying for, but literally could not use. And it really forced us as a small business to look at how we had to engage with our community and our client base to work with them differently. There were the immediate assistance programs such as the CEBA, such as the wage subsidy, which actually didn't, I actually advocated that the wage subsidy in CEBA when it first came out didn't work for businesses like ours. Most small businesses have self-contracted employees. And I spent a lot of time with Michael at the time and other contacts that I had in Ottawa to say, the CEBA account, you're asking us for payroll. We don't have payroll. We have self-contracted workers. How are we supposed to get assistance and float our businesses when you've set up a structure that doesn't work for us? And the government heard that and changed it. Some people, even today, I was working with a local business this morning that didn't even know that CEBA had changed and that they were eligible for the account now. So, okay, we'll look at the comments afterwards. So, and first and foremost, when we look at small businesses at this moment in time, we have to look at them as how are we going to keep them afloat? What supports do they need, whether it's rent or loan deferrals or loan forgiveness to carry them through this time and help them to retrofit and pivot for the new demands that they have because of the health requirements. There's huge costs. One colleague of mine has already spent close to $12,000 just refitting their space to be able to meet the new COVID needs that will be on a go-forward basis. So when we look at investment right now with small businesses, it has to be not just on how we get through the pandemic, but how do we allow businesses to shift into a new longer term reality, whether it's enhancing their online business in a stronger way so that they can still keep a storefront over, perhaps in reduced space, how we continue the relationship over rent. Rents in the city are sky high, or they were up until now, but the market is now shifting. And, you know, work from the federal level down to the provinces to encourage landlords to understand that if they want long-term rentals, long-term tenants, then the rules of the game have changed. And that can come as a message of that if the federal government and the provincial governments are investing in business, then landlords need to step up so that they have good tenants, which are small businesses. York Centre is unusual in the sense that there is an industrial corridor from Steeles where Sanofi is, and through there's the Planters Peanut Factory as well. But for the most part, York Centre is really anchored in small businesses, primarily. It doesn't have a huge corporate hub here of any sort. Bombardier is winding down over at Downsview Park. And the lifeblood of the community is small businesses. So when we look at what will drive it, small business investment to me will be a priority on a go forward, whether it's through BIAs or other structures to help. You know, small businesses are usually run by local residents. So they're not just that they own businesses in the riding, they live here too. And I'd love to see more interaction in developing, you know, just like we have Wilson Village, that there should be more of those types of neighborhoods growing and developing anchored around their businesses. Downsview Park, in its planning, I've spent a lot of time with ID8 in the last few weeks, looking at the secondary plans of what is happening there. And there are both unique opportunities to enhance business in York Centre, but the message that I'm getting from community members is business investment or urban development in that area needs to have criteria of good jobs, clean building, being conscious of not having population density that will overburden infrastructure, and that it should incorporate affordable housing and be attuned not just to families, but include community centers and also space for seniors. So when I look at small business, I don't just look at it as how do we enhance small business, how do we enhance everything around what makes small business thrive, which includes where we live, where we shop, where we take our kids and our families for programming, and how we interact between business and community life. I don't see it as one thing or the other. I think you have to look at it as a whole.
All right, thank you. Regarding the environment, what are your main areas of interest and concern regarding local environmental issues? And what do you see as the solution as well as the plan to implement this solution?
Okay, so there's policy and then there's what happens on the ground. So I know for me in my personal life, the environment is a huge part of my life. I haven't bought a water bottle in over 20 years. Part of my choice to live in a condominium and not a home was because I didn't want a larger footprint. So I take the environmental piece in my own life very, very seriously. Part of it comes from living over in Israel, where cost of living and pollution, unfortunately, was quite high, and being part of a movement there that reduced at least plastic bottle waste to start when I lived there. It's how long since I moved back? A while now. Nevertheless, so there's the individual piece, and then there's the bigger piece. On the bigger piece, my priority with the environment and climate change is looking at my kids and what am I leaving them? What kind of planet am I leaving them to go for? It's something that keeps me awake at night, to be quite honest. I know that this government made huge commitments in 2015 in terms of the Paris agreements and reducing emissions, some of which they were able to push forward and some of which they weren't, and have recommitted now through the throne speech. The government is still committed to a policy of net zero by 2050, and I am proud of that goal. I think it's an important one and an absolutely necessary one for us to be making right now. That's one piece in terms of emissions. For me, the big piece is actually also water. I'm highly conscious of how we consume water, what's going into our water systems, and how we prevent waste of going into the water, because essentially, essentially that's the cycle of everything is through water. Oops, there's someone who wants to join. It's okay. So on that piece, I'm really happy that the government already has put things in place to reduce plastics in our oceans and waterways. They took a big step with that a few years ago and are continuing to push for that. Coastal conservation has dramatically increased under this government, which I'm really happy about 14% in the last few years. Hi. Love it. Hi. So I'm really pleased that the government's taking water seriously, but water at the same time is both what we need to protect, but it's also has been something that has caused a tremendous amount of damage. We know here that I know Downsview Park particularly, and all that area in Ancaster has suffered from flooding over the last few years that needs to be dealt with, and some of that is due to climate change. Some of that has to do with how wastewater is managed and recycled, or not currently being recycled well through that park system. And that's actually another piece that I've been working on with ID8 to discuss how they want to do that. So environment's very big on my agenda. I know my home that I moved into here, when we moved in, it was retrofitted with all the benefits and grants that we could acquire through the federal government and before the province cut them. So I'm proud to be part of a government that doesn't want to cut on environmental policy. I'm proud that the Liberals stepped in with the electric car grants when the Ford government cut them and committed to continue them, even though the province didn't see utility in doing so. And it's really, when I look at the platform going forward, it's one that's in line with my values of really cutting our dependency on fossil fuels, looking to invest in clean tech, because if we're going to create jobs, whether it's small businesses or big business, even in York Centre, this government and its investment of jobs and developing businesses is from a clean and green perspective, which is something that to me it's the smart way to rebuild the economy, and it's also the smart way to move our families forward going into the future.
Okay, thank you. The federal government is responsible for foreign affairs. Mm-hmm. And there are many nations that York Centre residents care about. What are some of your areas that you are particularly engaged with or passionate about on the foreign affairs front?
Okay. So yes, foreign policy is the federal government's purview. I'm going to start with the easier stuff before we get to the tougher burning questions on this. The key issues that I know for me that that concern me, and that I also look at with quite serious with quite a serious eye, first and foremost, is China. I was really pleased to see that our Prime Minister has called out about finally taking a firmer stand on China's coercive diplomacy tactics, especially when it comes to the two Michaels and its human rights record. It took a more forceful stance. You know, I have a master's degree in international relations and diplomacy, and there's always this push-pull of balancing between coming down firm and also knowing that friends support friends through back channel discussions first to try move agendas forward so that there's more equality and more discussion on moving agendas forward. And there's also times where countries need to take a firmer stance with their friends to make sure that their human rights records and values that we hold in Canada to be dear are held up to account. So I was pleased to see that Canada is taking Canada and this Prime Minister took a firmer stance on China in the last few days, literally, and that they are also speaking out more about what's happening in the crackdowns to the Hong Kong protesters who are demanding that democracy continue in that small island that has so much impact in terms of China and international relations. On the flip side of it, of course, as we know, China's power, global economic power, isn't a simple thing to contend with. And this is where the balance comes in. And I think that this government is really trying to find that even balance. When it comes to Iran, I'm glad that this government has taken the position not to reopen an embassy there. Iran is not a good player on the international field, and it should not be rewarded for it in terms of its domestic actions, nor in its foreign relation activity, as we well know. I'm glad this government acknowledges that there are parts of the Iranian policy that do support terrorism and violence in other countries that is a detriment to global stability. At the same time, for example, with Flight PS 572, Canada was in the complicated position of trying to help and support Iranian Canadians who had lost loved ones in that flight, and is able to leverage its foreign policy and its international relations to get the answers that it needs through its allies who maintain relations with Iran to a degree that we do not. So again, it's about the dance. Sometimes it's important to put your foot down and say, no, I will not have an embassy in your country. But at the same time, recognizing we have Iranian Canadians here who have their needs that need to be addressed when crisis strikes. Should we get to Israel now? Since that's what everybody wants to know on this talk. Okay, let's talk about Israel. So first and foremost, for those who know or may not know, I am Israeli Canadian. I was born here and have lived in both countries my entire life. Israel is a central focus of my life and my family's life. My family still lives there, and are, living in a country that has its ups and downs like any other country. I have a different lens on Israel than most people who have only lived here their entire lives and may have visited and have close affiliations to the country, by the fact that 1, being a citizen, 2, having worked there, 3, having been educated there, also having gotten married there and started my family there. Which means that my view on Israel's government may be different than some people who are part of this community, but it comes from the lens of experience. What I would say about my position on Israel is this: there are 3 basic principles that are unwavering for me in everything that I do with regards to Israel, whether I speak out about it in terms of its government or anything else that you may have read that I have written. The legitimacy of the state of Israel is unequivocal. It is not up for debate. It is not up for argument. It is not to be questioned by anyone. The state of Israel has every right to exist as a home for the Jewish people and for its and to be a democratic place for all of the citizens of that state, both Jewish and non-Jewish. The security and safety of Israelis is also not up for debate. Israelis have a right to defend themselves when they have been attacked and to use the appropriate amount of force needed to defend its civilians. The third point is that Israel, like many countries in the world, is embroiled in conflict, and Israelis want peace. If peace was easy, then it would have already been made. There are many complications to achieving peace. I myself, when I first moved to Israel in 1995, was part of what was known as the people-to-people track of the Oslo Accords, where I was tasked with and funded by the Scandinavian country track to have Israelis and Palestinians learn to live together, to start to speak to one another, to start to begin the process of reconciliation, similar to what we are trying to do here in terms of First Nations. It is not an easy process. It is not an easy journey. However, it was important work to be done at the time. For most Jewish Canadians, the concept of that kind of work is distant to them. It's unfamiliar. And it's something that I highly encourage people looking into the concept of reconciliation and that type of work, because it's an important part of community building. As I started this discussion tonight, I said community engagement and community building is a priority for me, even between communities that don't necessarily get along. And that's where the lens of my work started when I started in Israel years ago. There have been rumors that I support BDS. That is unequivocally false. Those who know me know that I have never supported it. Never have I spoken out to support it. Never have I written anything in support of it. And it is an unfortunate reality of social media that there are those who may interpret it otherwise. I don't feel a need to have to defend lies. I feel the value of my work comes from the work that I do. There are those of you who have made associations between the New Israel Fund and being a BDS supporter. To that, I tell you that New Israel Fund in Canada, you should all know, is part of the Community Action Committee of CJA, meaning it is not a left-wing organization. It is within the umbrella of community organizations that represent Jewish life and voices in Canada. So whether you have read NGO Monitor or whether you have read any other articles that vilify the New Israel Fund, you should know that, again, they are false. When it comes to the work of the New Israel Fund and what it stands for, the New Israel Fund's mandate is rooted on the Israel Declaration of Independence, which calls for equality, democracy, and justice for all of its citizens. It does not say Jewish citizens. It does not say Jewish citizens, but not Jewish citizens. It says all of its citizens. Israel, like many countries in the world, does not only have Jews as citizens, but it also has a very thriving, about 30% of the population is not Jewish. These are individuals and citizens of the state who work, pay taxes, are doctors, lawyers, teachers, police officers, some serve in the military, who are a thriving part of what makes Israeli society everything that it is. The New Israel Fund supports organizations in Israel run by Israelis that advocate for social justice, democracy, and equality. It does not support BDS, and if anyone tells you that, they are sadly mistaken and have not done their research. Do I need to say any more about this one? Or we'll wait for the further questions?
I hear no in the chat. So
what I will say is I had a very long conversation yesterday with an individual who was concerned, and I took the time with them. They may still not vote for me, but that's okay. It's not about whether or not they vote for me. It's about let's get the record straight. And I want to thank the Bathurst Manor Action Group for allowing that to happen. This is the forum where it should happen. Social media can become a cesspool. And I felt this would be a far more fruitful way to have this discussion than any other way. If any of you have any concerns or additional questions that you want to ask me, you are more than welcome to. The New Israel Fund is an organization that I am proud to have been a committee member of, to advocate for Israel. Do I think BDS is anti-Semitic? I think that there are underlying strains of BDS that are anti-Semitic, because in its root, it says the state of Israel should not exist and that it is Therefore, Jews should not have a home. And in that case, I do agree that there are aspects to BDS that are definitely anti-Semitic. I'm putting it in NGO monitor. Okay. The last thing that I do want to say about Newsreel Fund and BDS is when someone asks me, well, how can you work there and push back on BDS? I actually think that the work of the New Israel Fund in showing that Israel is a country that has citizens who advocate for social justice, that has citizens that advocate for democracy, that has citizens that advocate for equality and hold the government to account when it does not, is the best balm to BDS. BDS would like to vilify Israel as all kinds of things. And that is, to me, the work that the New Israel Fund highlights of the work on the ground in Israel of Israeli citizens is the best way to push back. And that's where I'm going to leave it.
Thank you.
Since I'm on QA duty, I just wanted to consolidate because Michael, you said there weren't any more questions on the topic. But I think one clarifying question just from the Q&A, because I do think it's important that we address, is consolidating several of the questions here. And I think that the question I keep seeing is, do you recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? And do you support moving the Canadian embassy there?
That's a tough one for me to answer on many, many levels. So there is a differentiation between Jerusalem and East Jerusalem at the moment. And having worked at City Hall, I can tell you that really working in the belly of the city operates in terms of its infrastructure and in terms of its management of all of the residents of the city, including East and West, with an understanding that there are areas of the city that come under question. However, the city as the city operates as one unified city. At the same time, currently at this time, okay, the comments are distracting. I'm trying not to see them. The Knesset, the Supreme Court, all of the national government ministries that run the country are in what's known as Jerusalem, which, if you're looking at East and West, are the west side of the city. So where the Givat Ram campus is, Hadassah and Karam, there's 2 Hadassah hospitals, there's 2 campuses of Hebrew U, because of the nature of the city in terms of its status. The state of Israel recognizes Jerusalem as its capital, as any other country in the world is free to choose its capital. My own daughter was born in Jerusalem and her Canadian passport only says Jerusalem. It does not say Jerusalem, Israel. It's a complicated issue, and the foreign policy position is that the status of Jerusalem will be determined as part of a final settlement between the parties, and that is all I can say on it at the moment. I will not voice my personal opinion on it.
Okay, thank you. So getting back to our questions, we've been a community that over the last 3 or 4 years have been discussing issues about women's rights and anti-Black racism. What have your thoughts been as these issues have been at the forefront of human rights discussions?
That is a great question. So first and foremost, as a single mom and a business owner and a mental health advocate, that's part of the reason why I'm running right now, is because I myself have had to make choices in my life and my career because I couldn't have it all. Because I did have to make choices between having the career that I wanted, which I'm actually choosing now and running this in this by-election, versus raising my children as a single parent. And we need more women in politics. I was amazed that even when I put my name forward, how much support there was to help me in weighing out the decision with an understanding that for women to enter this sphere, Marco Mendicino put it beautifully. He said, when men decide to run for politics, they don't question it. They often just go for it. Not all men. I don't want to label all men that way. He said, but for women, they've shown this. There was a commission done last year to evaluate this. It's a 2019 report. If any of you want to see it, it's a fascinating read. Women generally, before they enter the political sphere, need to be asked up to a minimum of 6 times before they will consider running. And that's at all levels of government, including municipal. And I think that's very telling in terms of how we structure life for women to be able to work. Women don't want to work from home. When women want to work, and they want to work in the careers that they want to work in. And we're not there yet. And for me, that is really an important piece of why I want to be in Ottawa, because I had to literally build my village so that I could do this, including a mom in the Manor and her husband, including having friends from my children's school supporting drop off and pickup and extracurriculars so that I could make this run, and also to make it work as I go forward. And women should not have to turn themselves upside down and into knots to be able to pursue the careers that they want. And that's why the piece of early childhood learning and other pieces of legislation that have been or proposed legislation that are part of the throne speech, to me, are that first step. If we move on to systemic racism, it's here. And we need to deal with it, and we need to address it on the most fundamental of levels, and there is no more time. There's literally no more time. And what we're seeing, and whether it's south of the border influence or whether it's social media, there seems to be a freedom to voices trying to tamp that down, which means that we need to push back harder. And by pushing back harder, it doesn't mean just putting down legislation against hate speech, or putting down legislation to make sure that there isn't discrimination in the workplace. We need to invest. We need to invest in order to elevate communities. And that's what this government has proposed to do. I love that I'm running with Marcy Ian. She and I speak every Sunday for about half an hour in the evenings, going over a week as we run through this race. Her as a single mother, and myself as a single mother, her as a Black woman, me as a Jewish woman. And we have so much to talk about and ideas to share of how our communities should be working together to address issues, to elevate our communities, to support our communities, and to support other communities. It's no mistake that the NCCM, National Canadian Council of Muslims, CIJA, the World Sikh Organization for Canada, and other groups came forward to demand from the Prime Minister's office that we deal with white supremacy and that we deal with the belly of racism in this country. And I think it's just the beginning of groups coming forward to lead the way in bringing voices together to not only address racism as it happens, but the roots of systemic racism, which means investing in communities so that their communities move forward and succeed economically, socially, and culturally in Canada, just like every other community.
Thank you very much. So that is the end of our questions. Yaara, I want to thank you so much for
Matt, sorry,
giving us-
Michael, is there an opportunity? There's a lot of questions that are in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Yaara, if you have some more time, you maybe can pick a couple more, like Matt's or April's or
so
Rebecca's,
yeah,
perhaps.
So
I mean,
okay, I do have time.
Okay.
What I'm going to ask is that we that I'm going to let Daniel, if you don't mind, I'm going to let you you and Michael kind of moderate if there's repetitive questions in the Q&A. I know there's a lot of comments flying, and I can't really address all the comments. You know.
Yeah, I've been on QA duty while Michael's been doing such a fantastic job. So just want to make sure that we make sure all the 50 plus people are heard.
Yeah.
So I think and I hope that Rebecca's question was just answered. Her question was, I'd like to know how you're going to protect the Black community in our neighborhood and how we're going to limit police activity in our neighborhood. I know you touched on systemic racism, but if you can perhaps comment.
So as the MP, as the MP stepping into that role, first and foremost, I think my job is to ask the Black community what they need and how they feel they need to be protected. Okay. I don't have those answers. I would say that is truly the first step in my job as being the voice to Ottawa for all of these communities, is to meet with that community. There's the Jane Finch Community Center Association. They've been on the CBC a lot. I've reached out to them. They're actually in Judy Scro's riding officially, but nevertheless, that's where those conversations need to start.
Okay. Here's a quick follow-up question. How do you feel about police as they are, and what are your plans regard to policing in Canada? Does what's been happening change your perspective, or provide you with a new perspective, perhaps?
I'm not sure what she's asking me in terms of how do I feel about policing. Do I feel that policing in Canada is discriminatory?
I think that may be what she's specifically asking, Rebecca.
I'm not. I'm prepared to talk about that as an individual.
Okay, so maybe she can follow up with you directly. With Matt, the question is, where should the government find the funds to pay for massive deficits since Trudeau was elected and have exploded under the pandemic? I think it's over 400 billion at this point. Right. Are they to raise taxes, wealth taxes? What do you think is the best approach?
Sorry, just leave the questions as they are.
So to Rebecca's question, yes, you can meet with me and speak with me directly. We'll get you that contact information. That's too big a question for this forum.
For sure. And so I think that what we'll do, and believe me, those questions will be shared with and asked of the other candidates as well. As I said, you know, everything that happens in this one will be asked of the other candidates as well. And I think that
there's the deficit, Matt's deficit question I can touch on if they'd like.
Sure, if you would like.
Okay. All right. So first of all, going into the pandemic, of the G8 countries, we were actually in a great position economically. We were running a very low deficit at that point, and the truth is that our economy was driving well. Part of my master's degree is actually in global economics, so I will say this about it. It is a myth that countries should not have deficits. That was something that the Conservative government famously always put forward, is we're going to have a zero deficit. If you're curious, there's a great New York Times article that came out a few years ago that explains why countries should carry deficits, not exploding ones, but nevertheless, it makes sense for countries to carry governments to carry deficits in order to invest in their economies. That being said, how are we financing this right now? So there's from a few pieces. First and foremost, the government has put forward an understanding that what is being put out now, the investments that are being put out now in terms of keeping Canadians safe and healthy, which is the #1 priority, making sure that all Canadians have an access to a vaccine when it becomes available, and making sure that all of our essential workers, whether they are medical professionals or other essential services that we need, have the not just adequate, but right equipment for as long as they need it and for as long as it takes. So if it takes longer, then there will be more money put on the table to make sure that we have it to keep Canadian families and businesses safe and running during this time. How do we pay for it? That's a great question. So first and foremost, I would say if you have a house in Bathurst Manor, you made a decision to carry a mortgage, I'm sure. And you weighed out, well, could I put another 100,000 down because the interest rates were low and just carry it a little longer? Yeah, I'm going to get that house. The same is true here. So the government has made a commitment that in terms of financing this deficit, that interest rates, the country at this point in time is borrowing money against itself at low interest rates, that if you look at massive income charts, which I can show you how they look, of how these interest rates are calculated and its amortization over time, we can afford to do this. We actually cannot not afford to do this. If we didn't do this, we would watch our economy collapse and watch families not have food on the table or roofs over their head, which is something that certainly if I am fortunate enough to be elected as a government official, would not tolerate under any circumstances. I know what it's like to be a single parent and have to move back in with my parents until I could afford a home to even rent. So for me, in terms of my drive and my vision, I would not sleep at night as a government official, putting in austerity cuts at this point in time when we are in a crisis. To put it forward, so how do we restart the economy? I mentioned earlier, investing in clean tech, investing in a new type of economy that has potential, tremendous potential for growth, and is the way of the future for the global economy in clean and green tech. Why not be leaders in that? Why not bring the brightest and the best here to be a leader in a growth economy that needs to happen? That's the first piece of the puzzle. When you are an investor and you're looking at businesses to invest in, you look at what's going to lead the way, not businesses that are falling behind. And that's the vision of this government and how it's investing targeted investments to how we restart the economy. Part of that will be women. Studies have shown that if you invest in early childcare, for every dollar of childcare you invest as a government, you make 4 back for the economy at minimum. Some have even said 6. So to me, that's a great return on investment. I would rather see the country invest in early childhood learning and making sure we set up kids for success from the get-go, and include that and to set us all up so that mothers can do the work that they want to do in the workforce and get the economy moving again. It will take all of us, and by investing in our children and investing in women and investing in clean tech, things will move faster than you think, in my opinion.
Okay.
Just want to be respectful of your time. Do you have until 9:30 just to make sure everyone gets their questions asked?
9:45. That'll be
amazing.
Okay.
Samantha had a quick question for you. So thank you for the candid response here. Would that include universal childcare? She asked. And I come from the tech space, and I don't think that clean tech is a strong suit of ours right now. And I think that there's obviously a comment that I would love personally for you to share about our reliance on like Saudi oil as opposed to local oil, and supporting jobs right here, as opposed to what we're doing, which is paying even more now for foreign oil. But first, to Samantha's question about universal childcare, do you envision that being a priority for the government moving forward?
The throne speech has made it clear that it wants a national childcare plan. Whether we call it universal childcare or national, the throne speech is specific in outlining that it will be a national child care plan. Now, as we know, there is the division of power of jurisdiction between the federal governments and the provinces. However, the federal government has taken a position that if we are investing this much in Canadians, and this is where, for me, the mental health piece comes in. We are investing this much in Canadians and putting this much money on the table, then the stakeholder relationship with the provinces will have to shift a little. It will have to shift a little. It will have to shift to a more, it's already cooperative in the pandemic, but let's foster a foundation so that it's more cooperative in terms of the rebuilding of the economy. We're investing in this together, and that's the only way it's going to be done. So you can call it universal or you could call it national, but it is in the throne speech that it will be a national plan for childcare.
Something that I really admire is not only that you're a small business owner, but also that you're focused and you're really committed to mental health care. I think you could very well be a champion moving forward, obviously if elected. What would you do specifically on the mental health crisis that's happening right now? I just had a conversation with the executive at Ontario Mental Health, OAMHP. Lots of acronyms in healthcare. It's unbelievable. But there's no doubt there's a crisis right now, a silent crisis. There's an economic crisis, which we've touched on a little bit. And I think there's a question about SUS and new ways of supporting businesses like your yoga studio, moving forward. But specifically, your perspective on mental health and the state of mental health, and how the government can play a really important role right now, which I don't think that they've really leaned into, even with the $400 billion that's already been spent since the pandemic started. Maybe it's a number that you have in mind, maybe it's a program that you have in mind, but I would personally really love to know, based on your expertise, what should the federal government do to support Canadians through this? Because mental health right now is a silent pandemic. It's a silent crisis. So we'll love your perspective.
Okay. First of all, I don't think it's a silent crisis anymore. And I think that part of what we're seeing now in the pandemic is that the lack of investment by the provinces in mental health care, which has been a systemic problem for decades, has led to a situation where Canadians aren't resilient when they're in crisis. Like, let's look at it that way first, in that we didn't get here by accident. Yes, a pandemic happened, but that the resiliency of individuals to get through a crisis is not something that happened all of the sudden. And I say that for someone who lived in a country that was constantly in crisis. I lived in Israel during the height of the number 18 bus bomb. Number 18 bus was my bus to the university. And I worked at City Hall. Part of my job was to contact embassies and contact foreign families when their loved ones were injured or even killed. Two of my friends were killed in the Hebrew U bombing, and I had to be responsible to contact their families. So what I learned from my years over there is that if you invest in it from the start, then when crisis hits, you have the tools to move through it. So here we are, and the investments weren't made. So as I mentioned before, I think this is the moment, particularly in mental, in 2015, the federal government came forward to the province and said, we are going to allocate money to you for mental health. And the provinces pushed back and said, don't tell us how to spend our healthcare money. And I disagreed with it then, and I disagree with it now. And as I said earlier, I think this government has understood that the stakeholder relationship needs to be different on this piece, and I expect it to be so. They've put money on the table already. The fact that the federal government in the pandemic set up its own mental health network so that individuals could call in and get one clinician time as much as they need it already indicates where the federal government sees it spending money on mental health, which I think is just the first start. Many of my clinicians from my charity are actually doing double time between the federal program and the charity. And both of those programs are free. What we see is that people need access, and they need it to be easily available to them. The online platform has benefits to deliver it quickly, as we see through the pandemic, and maybe a great go forward during the last, how far are we into the pandemic now? 8 months. We've been running eight-week cycles of programs at our charity. Each group has about 20 participants in it. Every 8 weeks, there are 8 different programs running in 8-week cycles for 20 people per group. It can be done and very cost efficient with minimal investment. So it can be done, but again, it's an out of the box moment in seeing how we deal with mental health. First and foremost, getting people, unfortunately right now, on screens to get them out of isolation and into a safe space where they're getting tools and supports to help them through what they're going through now. I actually teach one of those courses on meditation and breath work in a clinician facilitated space, and it's been tremendous for the people in the groups that I've taught. So we need to think differently on how we deliver mental health. Obviously there are different aspects of mental health. People who are on the DSM-5 and require medication obviously need primary care, which is what we do when we work with Northwark General and Humber. And there needs to be a new perspective on how we deliver primary care and support care in mental health. And I think that's where the discussion needs to start, in my opinion. And it will require investment, but it will also require a reshuffling of the resources we already have. It's not as complicated as we think. It's just a matter of putting the feet to the fire to do it. And I'll share this on a personal level. I lost a nephew to suicide, who was a teenager, to suicide about 6 years ago, because the system, the resources of the system weren't available to him. So this is an important point for me, and I won't back down on it.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that.
I want to give you, Yaara, a chance to make any closing remarks before we draw this to a close. So I have a few words after you speak, but yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to sum up in any way you would like.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the time. We're kind of at 9:30 right now. So I think that it's great that a community comes together and asks the questions that matter to them, that it's not some outside agency, or that it's really a group of community people who are actively involved and engaged on what makes sense for their community and their thoughts and ideas, and that you've created a platform for this to happen, whether it was in person or now as we're on in Zoom rooms. So thank you for inviting me to that. And I hope we have more of these discussions in the future. I think they're amazing. So Michael, you're one of the first people that I met when I decided to go on this crazy journey of running for office. And it was with another friend of ours in the community, Sheriff Farber, who's an old and dear friend of mine. And I think part of the reason why it felt right for me to be running right now is that, you know, I'm of this community. We're all around the same age. We all have kids. We're all running our lives here and building our homes and our families. And it's an important time for those to be the voice that's in Ottawa for this community. I think it's such a gift to have the opportunity to really listen and represent York Centre from a place that I live here and have my business here too. I live here and take care of my community here too. And that's what good government should do. And that's what I loved about my time when I was in Israel, when I worked in City Hall and in politics there, is that in running for York Centre, I am running for, I want to represent my constituents because they're my neighbors. They're the people who live up the street. They're the business owners that I buy my bread from. They're the business owners that I take my children to activities to. And they're the business owners whose backyards, when it wasn't COVID, I enjoyed sitting in. And as being part of this community, not just the York Centre community, but also a member of the Jewish community, and also being involved on the mental health side and also in the yoga studio side of the more diverse part of this community. Everyone walks through our yoga studio from the riding. You'd be amazed who comes in there. And to me, it's an honor to have the opportunity to represent all of those folks who either have come through my studio, who have come through my mental health charity for support, and to have the opportunity to take my skill set, which I put aside for a long time, and use it for York Centre in the ways that matter. So thank you for the time. You're always welcome to reach out to me, each and every one of you. Michael knows how to find me. And I hope we work more together.
All right. Thank you very much. And yes, I want to thank Dan for all of the work on moderating the questions and for setting all of this up. I have no idea how to do it, so I am so grateful that you were able to do all of that and do it so well. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to the rest of them that we are going to do together, sir. Speaking of that, we have reached out to most of the candidates, and we'll continue to reach out to make sure that all of the candidates are provided with the same opportunity. We have heard back from most of the candidates and most of the campaigns, and as soon as we have those dates and times booked, we will definitely let you know. I know that with the Conservative campaign with Julius, it is taking place on Sunday. Not sure of the exact time at this point, but we are going to be having one of these with Julius. I have been in touch with the Green Party candidate, and we are going to be arranging a time next week as well, and also in touch with Maxime Bernier. And we are going to be arranging a time today, for next week, I hope. And so be on the lookout for those dates. I do try and get all of the information to as many community groups as possible. If you don't see the information in your specific community group, I'm putting my email right now in the chat, so you can feel free always to drop me an email and get in touch for an update, or just to let me know that you want information put into another community group. I have also been in touch with the NDP candidate, with Andrea, good friend of mine, and so looking to get a date with her booked as well, but we haven't touched upon that yet. But she does know that we're looking to have that again. She was at the one that we did provincially, so she definitely knows that this is going to be something, but we haven't gotten to the point of discussing a date yet. But yes, looking to do that with her as well. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here and for participating. If you have any questions or want to engage with me about anything with respect to this or any of the upcoming sessions with any of the other candidates, my line is always open, and I look forward to engaging with you. Again, thank you, Yaara. Thank you, Daniel, and I look forward to the next one.
Great work, Michael. Thanks, Yaara.
Thanks a lot,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye for now.
Take care.